Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
A toxic bloom of Estee Lauder youth dew seeped like mustard gas through the cracks around the bedroom door. Martin's handkerchief was no match for the concoction of rose, lavender and earthy moss. He was mid-sneeze when his mother emerged, wearing a dead fox around her neck, identification made easier by the fact that the creature's head, feet and tail were still attached. Martin had learned to expect the unexpected where his mother was concerned and simply blew his nose. Only the cat seemed surprised, unsure whether to snuggle up to the moth-eaten carcass or claw it to pieces. "He is rather spectacular, isn't he?" Edwina flicked the stole's brushed tail over her shoulder while admiring herself in the gilt mirror by the front door. Martin raised a sceptical eyebrow. "Don't you think it's a little macabre?" The fox's glassy eyes followed him. "Nobody wears real fur in public anymore, especially not to a funeral. Cynthia loved animals." "Live ones, surely." His mother looked him up and down. Here it came. Black porn takes white porn. "No wonder you're still a bachelor if that's the way you dress, Martin. That Oxford Don get-up might have been ironically fetching 50 years ago, but you'll never find a wife wearing tweed."
Joanna Nell is a British-Australian writer, GP and advocate for positive ageing. Her first 5 novels, The Single Ladies of Jacaranda Retirement Village, The Last Voyage of Mrs. Henry Parker, The Great Escape from Woodlands Nursing Home, The Tea Ladies of St Jude's Hospital, and Mrs. Winterbottom Takes a Gap Year, are national bestsellers. Today I'm joined by Joanna Nell to talk about her latest novel, The Funeral Crashes. Joanna, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Joanna, aside from public speaking, the prospect of death is possibly one of our greatest fears. And inevitably, death means funerals. But The Funeral Crashes suggests that funerals can serve a purpose other than just a stage in the grieving process.
Yes, I suppose it's an unusual topic for a novel, and particularly, given that I write books which are hopefully sort of entertaining and uplifting. And all the books that I have written so far have been focused on issues that are more towards the end of our lives or our senior years. And this is, I suppose, an inevitable extension of that. And it was more the idea of not focusing on death itself. That's inevitable. And she's saying something that not everybody wants to think about, although I think it is important that we do talk about that. But the effect that has on the people who are left behind, those who are grieving, the loneliness that can accompany later life when we start to lose our friends and our loved ones, and the importance, therefore, of celebrating those lives, but also coming together as a community to celebrate life and togetherness as well.
You are a retired GP and also an advocate for positive ageing, as you've just indicated. How do these things find their way into your storytelling?
It's inevitable, I think, when you start to write. I think there's an old adage, write what you know. And what I knew at the time I started taking my writing very seriously was that I was a GP and I had a particular interest in care of the elderly. And that meant that a lot of my working week was spent talking to people in aged care facilities and retirement villages. And it struck me how much life there was still in these places. We tend to sort of warehouse old age, if you like, and there's very little or more limited mixing between the generations. And I think as a society, we tend to sort of lump old age in, as such a homogenous group of people, and really just as an end of life where we should be retiring from life and giving up. And what I was seeing was exactly the opposite. I found that people were still very engaged. Yes, look, old age comes with its challenges, and nobody reaches those latter years without a few health problems. But what I noticed was that those who I thought were aging best were not necessarily the healthiest in body, but it was something to do with their mindset. I think that they were still positive and engaged and still wanted to laugh and have new experiences. And in many cases, have new relationships and even new love interests as well.
It sounds to me like, contrary to popular belief, that you found people with personalities that may have found their way into some of your characters.
Yes, look, definitely. I don't write about real people. I think, from a writing point of view, I think that would be too constraining to live, within what a real person would experience and feel and do. And I don't write about patients themselves because I have sworn that the Hippocratic Oath, and so what goes on or what is spoken about in the consulting room stays in the consulting room. But I take away the essence of those encounters, the emotions, and I see the challenges. And I think when I started writing, when I look back at my early short stories, they all featured much older characters. And I can't explain why that was, other than that I think it was something in my mind and that I wanted to, in some way, rewrite the narratives of these people's lives, or, dispel some of the stereotypes and myths around aging. And it's sort of become my genre or my brand, if you like. And rather than having older characters sit on the sidelines and be supporting characters, I like to put them center stage in their own stories. And for me, that's I want people who are in that demographic to feel seen. But also, I think it's a gift as a writer to have an older character because they have such interesting lives and more fully developed and interesting backstories than a younger character.
Let's talk about some of those characters. Martin Pottinger. He's a retired academic and archaeologist who's navigating the whims of his live-in, elderly and eccentric mother, Edwina. But does his profession define him? And what does it say about his approach to life, love, and romance?
Martin was a great fun character to create. He is a little bit of a fuddy-duddy. He's in his early 70s, and his mother temporarily moved back in with him when she broke her hip, but she seems to, in his words, have taken root. She has a cat called Shirley Temple who doesn't really like Martin very much, so they have a little bit of a complicated relationship. And he's been unlucky in love. He's emotionally stuck, I think, in his early years. He was an academic, a fellow in Oxford back when he was in his 20s, and something happened to him there, a relationship happened. And I think that he hasn't really progressed. He hasn't moved on from that. There's something that he feels he can't forgive himself for. So even though he's looking for love, perhaps looking in the wrong places, he's sort of pinned his hopes on a very glamorous and much younger academic called Mary. He's just sort of bumbling along, really, stuck in the past. And I would say that he's not so much lonely as, socially disconnected, really. He just wants to find a deeper relationship. And his interest in archaeology and Egyptology comes from his father, who was a renowned Egyptologist, according to the family story. And that archaeology thread really comes from my daughter, who's doing a master's in archaeology. So I've been absolutely fascinated in all the things that she has been studying. And there's also a thread with the ancient Egypt, because the Egyptians had very complex funeral rites. So if you look at mummification and glorification of the afterlife, they really are the ones who set a sort of gold standard for funerals in a way.
Let's talk about Professor Mary Blake. That's the lady that Martin has his eye on. She's the head of the archaeology department in which Martin used to work. She's apparently a bit of a fox, but not the kind of fox that Martin's mother hangs around her neck. But what's the attraction for Martin to Mary?
The obvious attraction is that she's attractive, and in his eyes, I think the attraction is always going to be an intellectual one. He describes her to his best friend Andrew as an intellectual thoroughbred, and he sees her as very much outside his league, but it doesn't sort of stop him, admiring her from afar. And they do bump into each other regularly at sort of academic functions. He tends to try and go along to drinks parties and things like that. And I think yes, I think she just, for him, represents what he thinks he wants in a woman. It's not necessarily really what he needs. This is always the case with characters. They think they want something, but they actually need something else. He's probably looking for something that's unattainable and therefore missing out, I think, on what a relationship really should be, which is about, connection of the heart, really, rather than necessarily the cerebral aspect. So she's quite aloof. She's really not the ideal person. She's recently divorced and seems to have a very intense friendship, shall we say, with the university's vice chancellor. And Martin was really going to lengths that sort of take him outside his comfort zone to try and woo her. At one stage, he does bid on in an auction for something that he thinks that she will love, and therefore will make her, in a way, see him as a suitable suitor.
Another prospect in Martin's life, Grace Cavendish. Grace had to retire to spend time with her terminally ill daughter, but now she's got a little bit too much time on her hands. What's her strategy, if she has one, for embracing the future?
Look, Grace she's been through a bereavement, and she has decided that it's time that she moved on. I don't think she's ready emotionally to move on, but she likes to do the right thing, and perhaps society would say right now is enough time. You need to get on with life, and I think she's desperately lonely. She, as a teacher, was used to being surrounded by children and other people all day, and she desperately misses the children, I think, particularly, which is why when she meets a young boy called Hudson, she becomes invested in his life and their relationship. But she goes to the lengths of volunteering, or at least trying to volunteer at her local church. Moira, who seems to run the church with an iron rod, is not so keen on having her hanging around, helping out, and she has her own reasons for that. So she's trying to help. She hangs around outside her front door, trying to bump into her next door neighbour, Stephanie, who's a younger working woman with 2 children. I think she's just desperate for connection, almost to the point where she sort of hangs around waiting for Stephanie to walk outside so she can, walk out and offer to babysit her children or invite her in for a cup of tea, which of course Stephanie never takes up. And I think she takes out her frustrations in the local reserve. She goes in and she picks out weeds, and this was a place that her daughter found was magical and as close to heaven when she was a child as she thought it. So. Grace is, even at one stage, thinking about going back to work, which she's finding is a bit of an obstacle. I think it's not quite as easy when you're in your late 60s to suddenly turn up at your old place of work and say, can I have my old job back? So she does what she can.
We've looked into some of the major characters in the Funeral Crashes, but there's also an ensemble of minor characters. Some of these minor characters might exist in the past, but others, like psychic medium Rhondda and the Reverend Rod and Grace's apparent nemesis, Moira, as you've discussed, are firmly in the present.
I love creating minor characters, and I think they do have to serve a purpose. I don't think you can just create a character and have them there sitting around. So they're often to reflect the past or the present, or something that's happening in the present, or provide an obstacle. So Moira, Grace's nemesis, she's a bit of an antagonist. She's what's standing between Grace and what she really wants, which is to have a really active role in the community. Rhondda is a psychic medium. She is the mother of a little boy that Grace befriends. And Grace is quite worried about Hudson. She's found him wandering around late for school. He's only about 8 years old, looking a bit scruffy and tatty, and decides to poke her nose in like the good retired teacher that she is and concerned for his welfare. And it turns out that his mother is a psychic medium who claims to be able to connect people to their dead relatives. And Grace is quite skeptical about this. She's quite a pragmatic person, but decides it's the only way to get to know what's going on in Hudson's life. So she sort of takes a chance on Rhondda, and she tries to remain very neutral about the experience, but I think she finds herself sucked in not only to a new friendship and a really unlikely friendship in her case, but to a situation that gets a little bit out of control as well. So I think that the minor characters, they add color, they add backstory, and every action of a character in the present really has to have some basis on what has happened in their past. There are these key moments, maybe in childhood or their early life, which shape the way that they make decisions in the future. So I think they're there to really just support the characterization and the plot, provide obstacles in the plot.
Your books explore the positives and the negatives of aging, the opportunity for self-discovery and the value of friendship, but also loneliness and the aging process itself, both physical and mental. Where do you find the balance between the many sides of that equation?
Yes, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I don't want to write something that is untrue and inauthentic. And if we're writing about old age, you cannot shy away from physical infirmity, disability, illness, grief, loss, all of those things that are a normal part of life. And although our lifespan has increased with modern medicine, we're increasingly spending a longer period of our later life with some form of disability as a result. And I found in my work as a GP that there seemed to be two camps. There were almost those who were resigned to their age and say, well, I can't because I'm this old and, this is it now. And those who sort of rather fought against that and said, no, I'm this old, but I'm going to do this anyway, and I'm not going to let age define me. And they were the sort of more stubborn ones, the more positive ones actually did age better. And there is some research behind this too. A study at Harvard and the Mayo Clinic showed that when it comes to attitudes to aging, optimists live longer than pessimists. So if you hold positive stereotypes around aging, you actually live longer and you're less likely to develop dementia too. So I think living positively, and the WHO have declared this decade as the decade of healthy aging. And that means more towards positivity, functionality, and well-being rather than health itself in terms of, the absence of disease. And I suppose I'm always wanting to put a little bit of a health message in. The doctor in me never quite goes away. So my characters will have very real things that are associated with age, but I want to show them overcoming those as best they can.
Joanna Nell, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely to talk to you.
I've been talking to Joanna Nell about her latest novel, The Funeral Crashes. It's published by Hachette, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to Good Reading print and online magazine at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.